Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. My name is Max Kozlowski. I'm going to be your host, and we have a very, very special guest with us today. Our guest is on a mission to transform people's lives and serve others. He not only helps people, he is focused on and willing and working on the development of people's mindset, their passion, their heart, their businesses, their well-being, their community, and I can keep going on and on and on. Our guest is focused on serving others and teaching other people how to better serve and how to be better steward of what they have for others. I don't want to get into all the details because he's going to be able to share a lot of his amazing mindsets and thoughts on leadership. But the proof of the pudding is when you actually get to see what he puts his hands on and how he transforms things. He's been the steward for Southwest Exteriors for over 30 years. And if you've ever interacted with this company, you know it is special. You know that from the moment you first pick up the phone and talk to them to well after your project is done, that they have a true commitment, passion, and care for people that they work with. His organization is both innovative, but yet deeply rooted in values, which has, to me, in my opinion, created one of the greatest organizations that we have around here. If you have an opportunity to do work with them, to interact with them, to visit them, there's so much that you're going to be able to learn when you're combining innovative mindset, values, purpose. You get what our guest today, Scott Barr, has built. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Max, it's an honor to be on with you. Thank you.
Scott, we could talk about, leadership, business, life, and you could add so much ideas, creativity, values, things people could actually use. But today we're going to focus on leadership. And I think one of the first times I heard you speak, it was actually on that subject. And I was very impressed because it was very clear to me that you were not someone that was just only talking about an idea, but that you were living what you were talking about day in and day out. But before we go into all that good stuff, I'm just continuing to tease our audience here. What's something great that's been happening in your life over the last few months?
Well, I think that one is in September of 21, I turned 60. And I feel like I've woken up in a whole new season of life. It's a much longer story, but it's just very excited about the journey I'm on, the season of life I'm in. And really, I think the journey started when I was 20 years old with the recovery program, and we can get into that as well. But it's basically 40 years, the last 40 years of my life, starting when I was 20 up until now. I feel like God has been preparing me for this next season of leadership, and I have lots of clarity. I have lots of challenges, and I never want people to think we have things figured out. And, you have an outside perception, an inside reality. So from the outside, everything looks good, but on the inside, we have messiness, just like any marriage or any family or any church or any business. Things on the inside are messy, but we're learning and growing. So that's the good news.
That is cool. I think I first heard you speak about 5 years ago, and you were also preparing for something and you were also working on something. Is that just part of how you view the world, where you're always kind of getting ready and excited about what's coming up?
I think so. I'm very much a forward thinker. My strength is around vision, not around execution. And my gifting and my calling is really around connecting people, ideas, and opportunities, and supporting kingdom leaders by connecting with kingdom resources. So I'm a member of a number of different networks that are a lot of co-creation going on. So very much excited about the future, and we're building our business to transition into eternity. So we're definitely long-term thinkers versus short-term thinkers.
And I can see that in how you're innovative in building relationships and cultivating them and taking care of them well after the sale has occurred. And I continue to see that. So let's talk a little bit about where did you first learn or understand that there's this thing called leadership, right? That there's some people that are kind of guiding and paving the way for others, or that, there's people that rise up. How was that in your experience? Where did you first learn about
Yeah, so I would say it started with team sports. I really didn't connect team sports with leadership, but it was certainly being developed unconsciously. And then got into the business world when I was, still in college, and really didn't get trained on leadership, but there was leadership involved. And it really wasn't until 1994 when I came to work for the business that we have today in May of 1990, bought it in January of 1992. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I was really in a bad mess, in a bad hole, and got connected with a peer group, a mastermind group of a couple of ladies. It's called Remodelers Advantage, and they had formed these peer groups. And I joined one in 1994, and I did that from 1994 to 2004. And that's really where my leadership journey started. When I really started listening to other business owners that were great leaders and had mature, healthy businesses, and started learning best practices, and then kind of the peer group accountability. So it really started in 1994.
It's so interesting because I hear this all the time, and that's actually one of the things that now I look for with the people that I work with, which is that maturity, that understanding, and that pushing aside of the ego, where you go from thinking that you have to have all the answers to actually becoming open and willing to listen to others. I believe peer groups are a really good place to be, where you have other people that are going through some of the same situations. Maybe they are a step ahead of you in some places, maybe they're a step behind you in some others, but you start to see other opportunities, and you start to realize that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, even if you are Scott Barr, right?
Yeah, that's one thing I always say, that I'm never the smartest guy in the room, but I can always find the smartest guy. So
Yes. So how has that ability to find the smartest person in the room transformed your leadership and what you're able to accomplish day in and day out?
yeah, I think it goes back to the gifting around connecting people, ideas, and opportunities, and really being able to be aware of what the need is. There's experts in all different areas. And sometimes I get too much advice. So I don't know if it's better to have too much or too little, but I lean towards too much advice. So always just looking for experts in different areas. So whatever I need, and if I having a network of people, and you don't know who to reach out to, you can reach out in the network and find the right experts. So it's really, and I like multiple opinions. I like different perspectives. Everybody sees the world differently, obviously, and so I have to take different opinions, and really pray about it and discern what the right answer is. So
Such a powerful skill, and and we could do a whole hour conversation on that idea of experts, expert advice, different points of views, and then what is your process for taking all this information in and then deciding what to do with it, right? Because a lot of the information that you're going to be getting is actually going to be contradictory. And when you talk to one person, that seems to make a lot of sense. And then you talk to another one, that seems to make a lot of sense. What is your process to sort through that and decide what the right approach is?
yeah, we developed a decision making filter. We developed it a while back, and I don't remember all the details, but it's basically a frame we make decisions through. And one of them, does it move us towards simplicity, or does it move us towards complexity? And anyway, there's different components to it. So basically, having a decision making filter is essential for that.
So you've actually systemized decision making,
Right.
and there's a criteria, there's a philosophy, there's an approach to that, and how to go about it. And I'm guessing that you are one of several people that take these ideas through that decision make matrix.
Right. Yep. That's right.
How or where did you come up with both the idea and the elements of that matrix?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a vision frame, which was created by a guy by the name of Will Mancini, and primarily working with churches, but it applies to any organization. So that's where that vision frame idea came from.
Excellent. That's one of those things that we just don't get taught, right? We sometimes are just taught to, you should be smart and should be able to make really great decisions, but we never really get taught frameworks on how to make decisions in different situations. So you're kind of solving the master equation, which is we filter everything through here, which makes everything easier. So how do you think this decision matrix connect with or works together with your values and 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 the culture you're building in the organization?
Yeah, I guess I can talk a little bit about that. So we only have two core values, and those two core values are love and excellence. And obviously, love is number one, and excellence is number two. So I'm a follower of Jesus, and I see the world from a biblical worldview. And from that biblical worldview, if we build great businesses and we do it without love, then it has no value. So in God's economy, it has no value. So that's got to be our number one priority, is stay focused on the core value of love. And so for us, what I'm really focusing on in this season is learning how to build an authentic, Christ-centered, loving community in the workplace, and have that as the core of what we're doing. And then everything else flows out from that. And we tell people, we're very open, that you do not have to be a follower of Jesus to work with us, but we do ask you to live out our two core values of love and excellence. And we also tell people that we want you to make sure you always feel physically safe, emotionally safe, and spiritually safe, all three of those. And if you ever don't, you've got the responsibility to speak up and let somebody know. And if they're not responding, let me know. So we're very, very passionate about making sure everyone is safe in every area. So we don't want anybody to feel like if they don't believe what we believe, then they're less than, or that they're being judged. So we're very clear about that. And that works really well. So, we have people that come to work with us that are not Christ followers just because of our core values of love and excellence. We had a guy that just joined us recently, and that's why he came, because of our two core values. So anyway, that works really well. And then the second value is obviously around operational excellence. So from a biblical perspective, we believe that the Bible teaches that whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as though you're working for the Lord, not for man. So the reality is that that's what we're taught to do. But if you do your work with excellence, profit come. So there's a prosperity gospel that I don't believe in, which if you do the right things, the great things happen. But it's just a principle. If you do your work with excellence, profitability follows.
So, Scott, to me, it's one of those really interesting places where we've got ancient wisdom and modern research, and they just combine beautifully, right? They collide beautifully, because what you said is a lot of the latest and greatest answers, right? From research projects Google has done, Project Aristotle, Project Oxygen, and you just summarized it. But I believe that you got that insight from religion, from Bible, from ancient wisdom, not necessarily from the latest business book. So I'd just like to understand how you kind of connected the dots.
Yeah, so it's a lot of reading, and so I didn't do very good in school. I wasn't a very good student and struggled at school. And it wasn't until I figured out that I actually do like to learn, as long as I'm interested in what I'm learning about. So I've been on I would say a lifelong education. So a lot of it is understanding brain science. And there's a guy by the name of Jim Wilder, and there's a ministry called Life Model. Life Model Works, and there's a life model in understanding brain science. He calls himself a neurotheologian. So I'm learning a lot from what they're doing. There's another lady who's based here locally, and she has an executive reinvention program, and it's a combination of philosophy, theater, and I can't remember the third component. It's theater, philosophy, and psychology. It's a really understanding how the brain works, how God created the brain. And there's there's an idea that there's a universal human paradigm that we're born into. And we developed that paradigm from the time we're, 1, 2, 3 years old, and all the way to our late teens, early 20s. And that paradigm, that universal human paradigm, the best we can do inside of that paradigm is survival mode. And in order to get out of that paradigm, you have to go into the reinvention paradigm. So the basic of that is there's no way things should be or shouldn't be. So everything that happens is what happens, and our frustration and our anger, everything comes from our interpretation of what happens. So that's a whole different thing, but it's just a bunch of different disciplines that come together that I'm just fascinated by. And so the challenge is, if I learn it and don't live it out, then it has no value. So I have to apply what I'm learning. That's why I'm very task oriented. I'm not people oriented. My orientation is not to love on people. My orientation is to get things done. So it's been a really part of my transformation, and living with joy is part of that transformation as well. But I could go on and on about that, but that's enough.
Thank you so much for that. So just a quick reminder for our audience, you can go to practicalleadership.com with one L. You're going to be able to download a summary of today's podcast, and we're actually going to get a little bit more detail, and some of the names that Scott has mentioned, some of the websites you could use as resources as well. So whatever you didn't catch, you're going to have an opportunity to go download and fill yourself in on all of this. So I love that we're talking about this because to me, it's also super important. I think that for us to be able to work with people, we need to understand people. And we have to understand people at the brain. We have to understand people at the heart. And it sounds like you've been digging and diving and trying to really understand humans so you can work with and interact better. So you kind of mentioned a little bit about this idea that being human is what makes some things difficult, right? Kind of what we were made for in the evolution that has to occur for us to be able to be better. So what are some of your biggest findings on that front?
Yeah, I would say it goes back to my personal journey. So the first thing is to be aware, and then you have to make changes. And so for me, I tell people I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm a recovering perfectionist, I'm a recovering control freak, and recovering bully. So my stress behavior is to become a bully. And so, again, having the awareness and really working on that and working on that in community and being able to have, relationships with other men that are authentic, where we can say, "Hey, I saw this. I saw you might be struggling in this area. Let's talk about it." So I think it's really a combination of high IQ and high EQ. Obviously, our IQ we can't. There's not much we can do about that, but our EQ, there's a lot we can do about that. So I spend a lot of time. I've been in counseling, worked with a lot of coaches, therapists, and so anyway, it's been a struggle for me, but out of I believe God always redeems the pain. So without going through a breakdown, there is no breakthrough. But anyway, that's a bunch of stuff just rolled together.
Yeah. So what I'm getting is a lot of self awareness, right? A lot of self awareness and self acceptance because you're not trying to hide who you think you are. You're bringing it forth and trying to work with it to continue to evolve yourself.
Mhm.
And it sounds like, you have no worries about sharing that with others around you, which means they can help you,
Mhm.
right? Which sometimes we believe that we have to be perfect. And as a CEO, as a leader, as the owner, you have to have all the answers and you have to be perfect. When in reality, you actually have to be vulnerable and open and let people know that they don't have to be perfect either, and that
Exactly.
we all need help. And that sometimes we need people to put a mirror up to our faces so we can see our own behavior and adapt and adjust to that. So you started with something and then you said something really different. So I want to just dive into that for a second. And so you said, I'm a visionary. And then you said, I'm task oriented. I get things done. We're
Yeah.
doing them with excellence. Scott, that just sounds to me like the whole package.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, that's it. That's interesting because that's where my energy comes from, but it's also not my gifting. So that I think clearly the energy comes from being able to cast a vision and getting things done is more. I've learned that I need to build teams. That used to it was where we had an owner operator model. Now we have a team led model. So it was making that conversion starting in 2008. That was a big turning point. So in terms of getting things done, now it's around team building and connecting resources. And, like I said, connecting people, ideas, and resources. That's getting things done that I do now versus kind of day to day task oriented work, if that makes sense.
Excellent. Is it okay if we dive a little deeper into this mindset of building teams? So how did you realize that the key to winning better, faster, excellence, love comes from team building and not individual doing?
Yeah, I would say the big learning around that came from around 2003 to 2005. I did a 3-year coaching program with Dan Sullivan. It's called the Strategic Coach,
Yep.
and that's where I learned to articulate my unique ability. And then they teach you how to build unique ability teams. So the idea is you help everyone discover what their unique ability is and then do the team building around that. So that's a big part of it. And then I also went through it's called a strategic life plan created by a guy named Tom Patterson. And he wrote a book called Living the Life You Were Meant to Live. And there's a Patterson coaching center up in Fort Collins now. But basically what I went through was a 2.5-day spirit led process that that was allowed me to create a strategic life plan. And that's where it all came together, where I was able to take my unique ability, my kingdom assignment, my calling. And so that was in December 2007 when I got clarity that my calling, my kingdom assignment is to support kingdom leaders by connecting with kingdom resources. And then in November 2008 was the first time that we communicated to our team that what we're going to do is convert our traditional owner operated contracting business into a team led model that can be duplicated and multiplied for the purpose of learning how to build the business as an economic engine to fund ministries and to develop kingdom leaders living on mission. So that's this November will be 14 years since we started this journey. It's been a long journey. So that's where the ideas, the awareness started, and it's actually been living it out since then.
Thank you for sharing that. I believe that sometimes we look at successful businesses and we look at leaders and we don't realize all the work, all the energy, all the effort that they've had to put in to develop their mindset, to develop their philosophies, to develop their approach, and to actually implement and execute. Right? We see a company like Southwest Exteriors, and we see the success, and we see how well it's ran, and the type of people that they have in there. But we can't see all the work that you've had to put in, all the people that supported you and that have helped you, coached you, bounced ideas with you to help you become the person that then was able to implement that. And I really thank you for letting us all see that leadership takes time, takes energy, and you need to develop those skills and you need to develop the mindset. It doesn't happen automatically. And it sounds like your philosophy is not that you were born with it. It sounds like you worked to develop it.
Right. Yeah, I think, that's a good point. I think one of the things in terms of the way God created me is just created me with persistence. I'll never quit. You have to kill me to make me quit. And then the other thing is just the reality of leadership is leadership has obviously a lot of advantages, a lot of benefits, but there's a lot of pain involved. We get wounded, we get hurt, we get disappointed, and we get criticized. It's just part of leadership. So having that mindset that you're just going to work, no matter what happens, you're going to work through it.
So let's talk a little bit about the idea of servant leadership. I think when I heard you speak, it was probably one of the first times that I had come across that concept the way that you mentioned it. I think it's become more popular, more well known. But help us and our audience understand what it really means and what you really have to do in that mindset.
Yeah. So I guess, starting with, again, the biblical worldview, Jesus said he came to serve and not be served. So obviously he's our model for how we live. And it's the idea of investing in others, equipping others, raising up leaders. And in order to do that, really, you need to serve. So it's all about leadership development, and you have to live that out. It has to be modeled. It's not something that could be just taught. You have to live it out. So it's really, and again, so going back to my control issues, it's much easier, much more comfortable for me to control the way things get done. We have to empower our teams and our team leaders and help them when they make mistakes. It's not, there's healthy shame and there's and toxic shame. So learning how to use healthy shame, which is a coaching in the moment conversation. So we have a group identity. This is who we are, and this is how we operate. And if something happens outside that group identity, or somebody's able to come to me and say, "Hey, Scott, I saw this. Is it okay if I remind you who we are?" And we have a conversation about our group identity. This is not the way we live. This is not who we are. And that's an example of healthy shame versus toxic shame. So there's a bunch rolled into that, but that's a summary.
Okay. So let's go a little bit deeper into that idea, right? Because I've never heard it mentioned as a healthy shame.
Mhm.
Shame just sounds like something negative.
Right.
And basically what you're saying is there's an expectation that is not met in terms of who we are, what we stand for, and how we do things. And you make people aware of it
Mhm. And it,
and course
Yep.
correct.
Mhm. Yep. And it's done in a healthy way. And the idea comes from actually an organization up in Lubbock called Beat and Bow. They're a production home builder, but they call it a coaching in the moment conversation. So, the whole model was to have a periodic review, a point of review, and you keep a list of all these things. And then you talk about it one time. Nobody likes doing them. Nobody likes to be part of those. So the idea is to celebrate in public, celebrate in a group when something goes well. But if you need a coaching in the moment conversation, you do that as quickly as possible and in a healthy way. And that's what we're trying to train and teach, is have the coaching in the moment conversations plus regular one-on-one. So you really have time to sit down with somebody and say, how are you doing? And really, work with them as a person. So that's some of that.
So what I'm hearing is higher frequency, right? Higher frequency in feedback right after, let's just call it something, an incident, right? Something
Yeah.
that doesn't quite match.
Right.
And I've been reading a lot recently on this idea that you've got to point out even the little stuff, and you got to point it out early and often versus letting it build and become something major. And it sounds like that's exactly what you guys do. You're consistently course correcting versus waiting to do a major shift.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's huge in terms of being able to do that and then teach others how to do that. And it's the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And yeah, it's essential for us to be able to grow.
So what would you tell someone, a leader that is trying to work with other people, and they notice a few little things that, they're not such a big deal, that they feel like they need to bring them in and have a conversation or have feedback. So it adds up and builds up, and then it becomes something greater. What would you tell them about why it makes sense to give quick, often corrective feedback versus having to wait for for a big thing to happen?
Yeah, I think part of it is just for our mental health, because if we don't address it, then our frustration is going to grow and grow and grow. And there's this idea that once our relational circuits flip off, then we're acting out of emotion. So you never want your relational circuits to flip. It's like a circuit breaker. So having those it can be a very brief interaction is the way to do it. So, and the other thing is to make sure that you stay curious. You're asking questions. I saw this. Can you tell me what you were thinking? How did we get to that point? Any ideas of what we could have done different? And not in a patronizing way, in a really healthy way, but the key is to stay curious.
So kind of seeking to understand first.
Exactly. Yeah. Using Covey's principle, Joe.
Yeah. So you understand first, then you can communicate the shift or correction in behavior that you feel is necessary.
Yeah. One more quick thing on that. Don't lose your train of thought, but one of my weaknesses is it's really easy for me to point out what they're not doing well, but I also need to be much better at catching them doing things right and celebrating those things. So I would encourage all leaders, you want to do 5 celebrations and 1 coaching in the moment conversation. But anyway, that's something that I really need to work on a lot, is catch them doing something good and celebrate that in a way that's very healthy.
So a healthy ratio, right, of looking for what's good, not just looking for what's bad, which again goes back to that natural human tendency of seeing danger and trying to avoid danger versus seeing what is good and what is working.
Right.
So how does someone know what is big enough that it requires a conversation versus, let that pass? Like, how do you decide, you know, I've got to address this, even though it looks small, I need to address it.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of variables in there. A lot depends on the person, and it depends on what it is. I mean, it's really more intuition. Is this something that I can let go, and it's not gonna creep, it's not gonna grow into something bigger? Is it a one off, or is this a pattern? It's just kind of having that intuition about what you need to address. And I think a lot of it is paying attention to what's going on inside of you in terms of your frustration, and um, because you don't want that to grow. It's better not to stuff things down. It's better to talk about things. So really pay attention to how you're feeling on the inside.
Yeah. So I've heard some things as simple as, people clicking their pens in a meeting or playing around with their phones, stuff that some people might feel like, well, you just let that go. And some other people are saying, no, I think you need to address even something like that if it's affecting the well-being of the team, if it's interrupting thinking, if it could lead to an escalation of that behavior, you want to address it. Why do you think a lot of people don't do it? Like, why are the reasons a lot of people are listening to this and I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that?
Yeah, I could just speak from my personal experience. So I grew up in a home where there was a lot of conflict, but I didn't see any healthy conflict resolution, which makes me a conflict avoider because it's painful. So I think that our family of origins have a big part of that. So anyway, healthy conflict resolution is a habit or a skill that's developed over time. So and it has to be practiced, and you could practice that outside, the live events. So anyway, that's part of the whole life model is practicing.
So practice is one. And I think you also mentioned this mindset of addressing and having some conflict is a healthy and positive thing
Yeah.
versus something that puts us in a danger or threatening situation.
Right. Yeah. And flip it around. If I'm doing something to aggravate you, irritate you, whatever, I would want you to say, "Hey, Scott, do you mind not doing that?" I would appreciate that. And I think that's a key part. We have to be humble in terms of the to be a good fit for our culture. If somebody is not coachable, then they're not a good fit for our culture. So I need to be coachable if I'm asking everybody else to be coachable. So I welcome that feedback. So and then
So,
how and then we model how we respond to that. Is people are always obviously always watching. So if somebody says, "Hey, for asking or correcting me," I need to respond to that with humility. Say, "Thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize that was bothering."
yeah. So people that are not going to take it as a personal attack, but rather take it as an opportunity to just be better.
Exactly. Yeah. And you'll recognize over time who's coachable and who's not, who has a pride issue and they're not coaching.
Okay, let's talk about that. I think that could be super valuable. If you go to someone like these big Jim Collins principles, right? The right people in the right seat doing the right thing. Uh, it starts within the right people. And you mentioned something really important. You got to have people that are coachable, that are going to be open to growing, the learning, that are not going to take feedback as a negative, not going to get defensive. And you said that you kind of understand that over time. So how do you do it? How do you figure out who's coachable and who isn't?
Yeah. I guess you have a coaching conversation with them, the first coaching conversation, and you'll see how they respond. And then you'll also, we have a term we call toxic team members. If we have a toxic team member, they can't stay on the team. So if you have a coaching conversation with them and then you hear back that they're grumbling about you or grumbling about something, it's just an awareness about people, watching how they behave, watching how they respond, and you'll always see people's true colors over time.
So have coaching conversations where you can figure out how people are accepting the
Mhm.
feedback, but also keep your ears open,
Mhm.
your eyes peeled to see what happens after that feedback. So
Right.
you can understand how these people are internalizing it in their response to it. So if you hear some of the chatter, um, some of the drama, you quickly pick up on that and say, that is not acceptable here. It means that this person is not willing to grow, learn, transform.
Yep, yep. So that then you have the coaching conversation, and then do they change? Do they make changes? That's another one. And then, the benefit of building a strong, healthy culture is toxic team members are much more easily recognized sooner rather than later. So having the team kind of protect the culture and say, "Hey, this guy is not a good fit." Having that and basically having everybody protecting the culture. So
So you create this organization where everybody is aware of what and is aligned and clear about the expectations on people's behaviors. And when those expectations are broken, people quickly raise their hands and point out the the misfit. So you've mentioned coaching conversations. Do you have an approach for one of those coaching conversations? Let's just say I did something I shouldn't have. Not that it would ever happen. What would that coaching conversation sound like?
yeah, so for me, it's reach out to them, whether it's in person or email or text. Say, "Hey, when can we get together? Have something I need to talk to you about," and sit down with them and say, "This is what I saw. This is what I experienced, and tell me from your perspective what you saw and what you experienced, and then talk through it." And I had one recently where it didn't really go well, but it was a coaching conversation that I had to have, and there's more work to do there, but it's, yeah, it's basically, and again, just staying. And breathing has a lot to do with it. So I don't know if it's done much, or there's a lot of science that supports how our breathing is tied to our emotions. And you make sure that when we're in those conversations, we don't stop breathing, we don't short breathe, and just stay calm, because that's essential without getting emotional in a coaching conversation, because it's obviously it'll trigger them. So anyway.
So you kind of set the tone for the conversation
Mhm,
and you make it feel safe for people,
mhm.
right? So there's going to be feedback, there's going to be a conversation, but it's safe to have it. And you're doing that through how you're talking physically and what you're doing physically, including the breathing.
Right.
I heard you say something I believe is super, super powerful, and it might just be second nature to you, but it might not be for a lot of our people in our audience. And you said this is what I saw. This is what I experienced,
Mhm,
which is positioning this as it is my perspective or my opinion. It's not necessarily the truth and total fact,
mhm, mhm.
which means we can discuss it,
Yeah.
right? Which means we can go into it and understand it.
Right. Yeah. And talk about, this is how I felt when this happened. I mean, the people, other people can't deny your feelings, but it's not making them feel like you're judging them. You're saying, this is how I felt when this happened. And I think that's helpful. The other thing is to be a great listener and not interrupt, and really think and listen. And maybe, take time to pray in the middle of it. There's all different things you could do to help those conversations go well.
So how does a conversation, a feedback slash coaching conversation that's going well, what does that sound like? How can someone recognize if things are going well? And then we'll talk about how do we know if things are not going well? Or
Yeah, yeah. So if it's going well, is the way they receive it. Yeah, I didn't see, or I didn't understand that. I didn't know if that was an expectation, or yeah, I didn't think of anything. I didn't think anything of it in the middle of it. But now looking back, I can see why you saw it that way, and I could see why you feel that way. Those are some examples.
so they are processing what you're saying, they're trying to understand it, and they're kind of
Mhm,
recognizing what it's doing to others or how it's making them respond or feel or how other people are starting to think.
mhm.
And that's how you know that this person is taking this well. What are some things that you hear when it's not going well?
Yeah, so one would be where they don't take responsibility, where they basically don't see, either they don't want to admit they've made a mistake, or they truly don't understand why that was bad judgment, or why it wasn't the right thing to do, where they basically get in defensive mode versus versus staying open, keeping an open mind, closed mind versus open mind. Once their mind closes, then you're stuck. So
What does defensive or closed sound like?
yeah, well, they might say, well, I was just following the process. But well, could you see that there we have a standard process, and making an exception to that standard process would have been a good idea in this case? Well, I'm just following the process. Just that kind of mindset, where they don't really want to acknowledge that they made a mistake, or they didn't use good judgment.
Okay. So in that same scenario, what is the sort of response that would have make you feel like these people get what I'm trying to communicate?
Yeah, I would say it goes back to saying, yeah, in looking back after, having time to think about it and reflect it and reviewing what happened, I do see that I should have done it differently. I could have done it differently. Basically taking responsibility for it. So there's a couple of issues. One is poor judgment, bad judgment in what you did. And then the second thing, the bigger, is not taking responsibility for it. So anyway, those are two concerns.
Excellent. So I thank you for that, because sometimes we hear about what you should do and even how you should do it, but I don't think we spend enough time thinking about what a good outcome looks like or sounds like versus a bad outcome. Which
Yeah.
it's kind of like giving a tool to someone and they are using it, but they don't know if they're using it correctly. So understanding people's response when you're providing that feedback will be key in understanding how well they are accepting it.
Yeah, it needs to sound like a healthy conversation, where there's listening and understanding, and it's not emotional. It's just a healthy conversation. We could have hard conversations and do it in a healthy way.
So for there to be good, healthy conversations, people need to feel safe. You said it emotionally, physically, spiritually.
Right.
If they don't, then they kind of close up and they get defensive.
Mhm.
How are some ways that you create this safe space?
Yeah, I think it goes back to just modeling what we expect and people having these coaching conversations, especially people that you've worked with for a long time. They're much more comfortable when you say, "Hey, can we sit down and talk about something?" So I think that that's the key is really modeling it and training it. We've got to be able to teach others how to do it. So the more we do it, the more the whole team gets trained in that. And the other thing is that nobody should ever it should never be a surprise when you get fired. So there's multiple coaching conversations that are going to go up to getting fired, and very clear that this we can't continue. This cannot happen again. And having to document that, use it all as part of the HR process. But yeah,
That is a whole other conversation that I'd love to have with you at some other time. But it's this idea that sometimes we feel like, hey, great companies have great people and there's never someone that shouldn't be there. And I think that the way you make that happen is by actually letting go of the people that are not a great fit, and
right,
that it's inevitable to have some of those people, but that you've got to act fast.
exactly.
Like, you've got to recognize it and you have to act fast. Because again, people that see your company and how it's running and how it's operating and the interactions, they might have a sense that nothing ever goes wrong, right? Or that everybody there is perfect and awesome. But the fact is, you've got to consistently be weeding out.
Exactly. It's like an ecosystem or soil. You got to keep it healthy. So
Yeah. Scott, I have this question that I like to ask, but I'm afraid of the answer because you've already given us so many different thoughts, resources, and tools. But is there a tool, a framework, a model that you love and you say everyone here should use this tool? Something that you might use with your team, that you might use in decision making or in business, anything that comes to mind as in like, look, this is my go-to. I want everyone to use this.
yeah, I would say, I liked a lot of Patrick Lencioni's work and the five advantages of a team, five disadvantages. So, understanding how the building that culture at the foundation is trust and the five components of that. I think that's a great tool. And the other thing is it's good that there's a really simple and inexpensive assessment that you can do through the table group organization. So I would certainly start with that in terms of culture building. So there's trust, accountability. I can't remember all five different levels, but that's a great tool and a great resource. And I love that guy. He's a great teacher, a great person, and great organization.
So Pat Lencioni, a lot of the things that you've mentioned are kind of collide with a lot of what he talks about in a lot of his books. You know, you're on the right path when you're hearing it from different places, right? You listen to the research from, Google, and you read a book from Pat, and then you read the Bible, and they all kind of are communicating the same things. You're like, there's something here. And if I remember correctly, the name of the book's The Five Dysfunctions of a Team,
That's it. That's it.
and they have a great field guide, and it's a quick, fun read. And as you're saying, everything starts with trust, and then getting comfortable with having conflict. Let's talk about trust, because I do believe that's the foundation for everything else, right? For example, if you don't have trust, then you can't have that healthy conflict that you're referencing, right? Then you're not going to want accountability. Then you're not going to be focused on results. What are some specific things that you can think of that you guys do to build trust in the organization?
Yeah, I think it's following through on commitments is one. If you make a commitment, you've got to follow through on it. So that's a big component in trust building, and just the daily interactions, the way we treat each other do we feel safe and trusted and not violating that trust? I think that the just consistency over time is what builds trust. And it's not one thing, but it's a lot of things done over and over time that builds trust. It's like the idea of making a deposit in a bank. You make a trust deposit, or you do something that loses trust. So thinking in terms of that.
Okay. So building trust in terms of making commitments and delivering on those commitments takes time. Do you have any accelerators of trust that you can think of, or is the whole system generating and creating that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to authenticity. I mean, in the way that I describe it as you have a continuum. On one end of the continuum, you have somebody that's completely vulnerable, authentic, and transparent. On the other end of the continuum, you have somebody that's what I call a poser. So they're what you see is not the reality. So and you can recognize that in people. So people that the more authentic and vulnerable you are, I think that's a fast trust build. And we can really sense who's being authentic and vulnerable.
Do you, for example, when you're hiring, do you test for this? Are you looking for this? How do you recognize when you see it?
Yeah, it's really, I mean, starts out through the interview process. So, some of the questions that you ask, tell me about your biggest mistake that you've ever made in your life. And if it's something that's pretty superficial, then you'll know that they didn't really go too deep because we've all made horrific mistakes in our lives. So the more authentic they are around sharing around questions like that are a good indicator.
So I guess their openness and willingness to really open up their hearts to you and be vulnerable and take a risk sharing something. The moment you asked the question, I went into my head and I thought about it and I thought, is it a business mistake or is it a life mistake? Because
Yeah.
I've got a few of those. So, and then the question is, would I reveal them? Would I really talk about them?
Yeah. And maybe just how they respond in that conversation. So, well, can you clarify further what you're looking for? It's just all part of that interaction. That's for me, it's just taking a lot of time and practice around that. But asking great questions, I think is an easy way to discover trust or to build trust.
So, do you have a couple of favorite questions in the interview process that you'd like to share, other than biggest mistake?
Yeah, I always start off with kind of what do you love to do and what do you not love to do, and then start asking questions around that. Give me some examples of something that a project that you worked on that went really really well, and they give me an example of a project that didn't go well. Give me an example of somebody that you've loved working with, and then tell me about not naming names, but then give me a person that you didn't work well with and why. So really, kind of behavioral questions. And there's a lot of really good behavioral questions out there, but that's some for me.
Okay. So you really want to tap into the vulnerability of people, it sounds like, right?
if
You're
if that's important to your culture, if you really have a desire for vulnerability and authenticity, then we've got to hire for that.
in that vulnerability and authenticity is key to trust. And it's difficult to build an organization that doesn't have a trust. So by definition, right, it's almost like you've got to be able to dive into and discover what people really feel, how they really behave, and the emotions behind them. I like to use the word ego a lot because it kind of describes how we protect our self identity.
Mhm.
And you're trying to find those people that are willing to take that risk.
Mhm.
And from what I'm hearing is you model it every day. You are letting people know that the correct behavior is to recognize that you're not perfect and that it won't hurt you to not be perfect if
Mhm.
you're working on overcoming it and if you're in the right place.
Yep.
So in this short conversation, I think that a lot of our guests are going to be able to, our audience is going to be able to recognize how you've gone through a journey of continuous learning and evolution and transformation, where you realize that you're going to have to work through others to be able to do great things and to be the best version of yourself, because you recognize that you're, I like to use the term genius in an area or a few areas. So you're
Right.
trying to tap into your genius and surround yourself with people that could be geniuses in their own areas. And that has led you to understand your passion, your purpose, your strengths and weaknesses,
Mhm.
and that you're consistently becoming aware of those and open and willing to share them with others. By modeling, others can be vulnerable themselves, then can be open to that feedback, and then can be open to collaboration and working better with each other versus having to be perfect or being superficial. And it's by tapping into that authenticity and building that trust that you can get the right people in the right place to develop and work on your two core values, right? love and excellence. And another of your principles, right, of keeping things and making things simple. There's so much more that you've shared with us here today. I just really want to go back to something that you said real quick. It's scary to be vulnerable. It's scary to be open. And there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this that may not be the owner, right? Might not be the CEO, might not be the president. Might look at Scott and say, well, Scott, that's because you own the business. That's why you could do that. Why is that not true? Why can and should people be vulnerable and should be open, regardless of their position and where they are?
Yeah, I would say it's whether somebody has a growth mindset or not, because we all, regardless of where we are in the organizational chart, we're all leaders at some level. I mean, we have crew leaders that then report to a project manager, that then report to an installation leader, that then report to a managing partner. But they're all leaders. That's the idea of the Stanley McChrystal would call team of teams.
Mhm.
So if you want to grow as a leader, wherever you're at, learn to grow as a leader. So that's what comes to mind.
I'm going to try to summarize a little bit of our conversation. It's so action packed that I'm going to miss a few things.
Yeah, a couple of quick things that I thought of real quick before you do that is one is another great resource is The Ideal Team Player, again by Pat Lencioni. So Humble, Hungry, Smart. I think there's assessment for that as well. So that's a great tool. And then another thing to model is client interaction. So if we make a mistake, we take responsibility for the mistake. We don't try to cover it up. We don't minimize it. We just do whatever it takes to make it right. So when you have team members observe how you deal with clients, in our experience, 1 out of 200 of our clients is what I would call unreasonable. So you have somebody that has normal expectations, you have somebody that has high expectations, and then once they cross that line to unreasonable expectations, you just have to do whatever you can do to separate from them as quickly and as cheaply as possible. But really being able to model this client interaction, these difficult conversations, and always take responsibility for your mistakes. Don't try to cover them up. Don't try to minimize and just fix it. So those are a couple of quick things.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. If I had to simply summarize your philosophy, your approach, it's openness and transparency. Like there's so much transparency, right? Try to improve, try to be better, use love, use excellence as your guiding principles. But you continue to push this idea of transparency, openness, willingness to be vulnerable, and willingness to do whatever it takes to get better, to do the right thing, to serve people. So I really appreciate it. There's a lot in terms of your mindset, right? Grow, never quit, recognize that you're going to be really good at some things and you're not going to be so good at some others. So make sure that you've got people that can help you recognize that and that can help you get better at those. Right? There's a lot of little examples of things that you mentioned. I'm not that good at that, but I want to be better at it and I need help with that. So for example, saying, hey, celebrate at a ratio of 5-1, right? For every 5 celebrations, then there could be one pointing things out that you feel like, well, I got to get better at that. You mentioned a couple of things that can be either good or bad, right? Like perfectionism. But recognizing that if others can see you trying to be a little too perfect, they can point that out and you could say, okay, maybe I've got to reset my expectation. Right? Mm-hmm. So decision-making framework that really helps you make big decisions. And the idea is people need to develop their own. Just for our audience, I'm going to try to talk to Scott and see if he's willing to share some of that decision-making model and matrix, and we'll make it available to you guys because I think it could be one of the most powerful things anyone can have access to.
Yep, I'll get that to you for sure.
Thank you so much. Download it, practicalleadership.com with 1L, practicalleadership.com. We'll have that for you along with a summary. Build teams. You can only do so much yourself. You have to build teams, and through teams, you're going to be able to do a whole lot more. Talked about never quit. High frequency of feedback, right? People will get more comfortable and more used to positive feedback. You called it like positive shame. It's okay to feel an emotion as long as it's used constructively. Super powerful idea. In feedback and coaching sessions, great piece of advice. you don't say this is what happened. You say this is what I saw. This is what I experienced. This is how I felt. It's undeniable. No one can argue with that because it's yours. And then you seek to understand, you stay curious, you ask questions, and you try to understand it from the other person's perspective so you can then figure out how to best proceed with that. And you're always on the lookout for how people are actually receiving that feedback and in those coaching opportunities. So you're looking for openness, you're looking for accountability, you're looking to see if they are processing the information and accepting it, or if they're becoming defensive, deflecting it, or rejecting it, which will tell you who's going to be coachable, who you can work with and develop, and who's going to be difficult, right? Build trust through examples, build trust through modeling. And then you also talk a little bit about some really important questions in the interview process. What do you love? What do you not like so much? Who do you work well with? Who have you not worked well with? What has been some of your biggest mistakes, to really try to understand how open and how deep they're willing to go with you, which is a good indication of fit with your organization and culture, and vulnerability, right? Which kind of, a lot of it kind of goes back to some of that. Scott, we could talk for hours with just the amount of coaching that you have received, training that you have done, books that you have read, seminars that you have attended. We could do this for days. I know you've got a few more things you want to share with our audience before we wrap up for today. So I'm going to give you a chance to share some.
Yeah.
more
Thank you,
thoughts.
Max. Yes. Just a couple of things that came to mind is just having a continuous improvement mindset. So I'm a fanatic about continuous improvement. Not everybody is, but I think that that's something that's essential for an organization that's going to grow, is to have that mindset. And then the other thing was that another interview question that I thought it was, tell me about your stress behavior. So we all behave differently under stress than we do normally. If somebody's not aware of that stress behavior, then that's a sign that their self-awareness may not be as high as it needs to be, because we all have stress behavior. So
Yep. I just remembered another one of those like things that you're not going to hear in a lot of different you're not going to hear anywhere else. Breathe, right? When you're in those feedback meetings, when you're in those interviews, breathe and model physically the behavior that you want others, and make sure you're breathing.
Yep.
Simple yet really powerful. Scott, before we let you go today, what is something that you're really excited about that's coming up in the next, few months, quarters?
Yeah, I would say, really excited about where we are as a business. So we've converted from one business unit in 2021 into three business units. So now we have a managing partner for siding, windows, and doors. We have a managing partner for concrete floors, primarily garage floors. And we have a managing partner. We bought a shutter and blind business. So it's taking our organization to the next level. Our long-term vision is to have a community of home contracting businesses all in the San Antonio, Austin market, with a shared service component. So all the back office, HR, legal, accounting, IT, marketing is all shared. So it's it's the movement, the advancing of this long-term vision that was actually inspired by Zingerman's, which is an organization in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which built a community of food businesses, they're great guys, and we collaborate with them. So that's what I'm really excited about, is moving that out. So I'm now we have an advisory board. So I'm in a board role. We have a CEO that's responsible for the business units. We have managing partners. So it's advancing the vision that's bringing me a lot of joy.
So it sounds like you're going to be able to help a whole lot more people with more and different needs. And overall, it's going to have a very positive impact in the community. And I just want to thank you for not only your time, but for the great example that you set, not only for your team, but for other leaders and for the community. I'm sure that in the not too distant future, you're going to have people knocking on your door, wanting to learn more about how you do things and learning from you, because there's a lot that can be learned, and there's a lot of value in being able to replicate even a little bit of how you do things. And I think that you'll, be able to have a long legacy in terms of the impact that you'll continue to have in the community. And I'm very thankful for that.
Yep, you're quite welcome. And we love to share, we love to collaborate. And there's a saying that I've never met a man that I couldn't learn something from. So we can always learn something from people that want to learn from us, and we can share. I believe that we have a God of abundance, not a God of scarcity. We have to have an abundance mindset. So I love sharing.
So when you download we talked about the decision matrix, the summary. Scott might share some other information there that you can go and download. Obviously, your website, maybe his email, and you'll be able to kind of get to learn a little bit more about his company as well.
Yeah. I'm happy to share my contact information.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for today. It's been a blast. It's been action packed, and thank you for your time again.
Yep. Very well done. You're a very good interviewer. So well done.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.